Good afternoon. Welcome. It's Monday. It's 1 o'clock. And here we are. Deal Doctor live stream. We're going to talk about a number of topics today. The first of which is be careful what you do and say when you're on a showing. There are a lot of products out there. Ring and doorbells, for example, but home security, interior home security cameras, and sellers have the right to have those in their house, provided they are not aimed at areas which one would consider to be have privacy. For example, the bathroom. But they do have the right to have them in their homes operating when you are showing the house. So if you don't want to get caught on camera saying something inappropriate, saying something negative about the house, even if your buyers agree with you, it could ultimately hurt your negotiations if you decide to write an offer on the house. So, but more importantly, I think it just gives a bad name. It gives a bad reputation to the agent and to the customer when a consumer, a home seller, sees video of their home being shown and negative remarks being made, disparaging remarks being made about their home. It's just not the appropriate thing to do. Save it for your private conversation in the car or in the office with your buyers. It also goes, I think, without saying, but I'm going to say it, so apparently it doesn't, that engaging with a seller in a conversation is probably in most cases inappropriate. If you're there with a client or on behalf of a client, it's probably best to keep your conversation about questions about the house and not get into questions that don't pertain or topics that don't pertain to the house. It can turn sideways very, very quickly. And so be very cautious to always represent yourself and Five Star in the most professional way by sticking to the topic at hand, which is the home for sale, and what is in your buyer's best interests. So I caution that's really, really important to remember to do. We touched on this a little bit last week or the week before, I can't remember. One of those weekends I wasn't here. It must have been last week. But working with other agents is really important, and establishing relationships with other agents in our industry is going to help you in the long run. Establishing good, healthy working relationships is going to help. One step toward that, I think that Eric wanted to mention, and so I will do it on behalf of Eric, is that agents should avoid taking requests for information or for documentation or anything that another agent might ask you personally. If they if they ask you, how did you arrive at that price? If the buyer's agent asks you, the listing agent, well, how did you arrive at that price? The wrong choice to make is to get defensive and say, well, my comps said so, and so therefore. You can say that, but it's the tone and manner in which you say it that can cause a reaction. And so and my answer to that would be, well, based on the comparables and the information that we have available, that's kind of where I came out. But I'd certainly appreciate your feedback, whatever that might be. The best feedback, of course, is if you write an offer. So if your buyers feel as though the house should be priced at a different price, by all means, they can express their opinion by writing an offer. And so keep your communications and your actions professional. Avoid getting caught on the drama hook. Don't go there. Don't allow yourself to become the story. You are there to help your buyer or your seller accomplish an objective, which is to buy or sell a house. And part of why people hire us is for our objectivity and for our third-party removal, particularly the removal of emotions from the transaction. It can get pretty emotional on both sides. Sellers, buyers, this is their home. It's just a house to the buyer at this point. It's our jobs as real estate agents to tamper down those emotions and stay focused on reaching a meeting of the minds between the buyers and sellers. So, if you run into a bully, let's say you run into a bully. I've never, ever in this business run into a bully. I just lied to you. I have. And I'm sure that many of you have. Again, don't get on the drama hook. I think one of the important things about dealing with a bully is to set boundaries and say, I understand that's your point of view. With all due respect, this conversation is going to be counterproductive. I'm not going to permit you browbeating me. And so if we can't talk on a civil, equal level, then this conversation probably needs to stop. And of course, what you're going to get in response to that is more bullying, at which point I usually say, apparently, then you are in agreement that we should end this conversation. And if they continue to bully, I will end the conversation. Thank you for your input. Goodbye. I'm not going to allow myself or any of our agents to be bullied by a seller or a buyer or any member of the public that has a gripe, and it may be a legitimate gripe, but the manner in which they do it is going to determine how I'm going to respond, and I encourage you to do the same, to set boundaries and say, no, I'm not going to allow you to treat me that way. If we can't interact as two grown-ups, then we probably should part company. Vague responses. Sometimes we ask, for example, where are the boundaries of the property? And if you're standing there with a listing agent, the listing agent may go, oh, there and over there. Well, where exactly is there and over there? Can you show me the iron stakes? Can you show me the wooden stakes which flag to the iron stakes? Do you have a survey, a boundary survey, which has little black dots on it where the actual boundary lines are? Let's get specific in getting information to our clients so that they can make an informed decision. Vague answers are generally going to cause problems, misunderstandings in the future. So get specific information, and if you can't get specific information, then you're probably going to have to either research it or you're going to have to go back to your buyer and say, I can't give you a clear answer on this. I can't find a clear answer. I can't get a clear answer from the seller. I warn you about proceeding because we don't really know. Example this morning, got a call from one of our agents that a storage shed is sitting on 3 feet of it is sitting on a parcel that was split off years ago, 15 or 20 years ago. This parcel was split off to be sold as a vacant parcel. But in the process of that, they didn't take into account where their storage shed was sitting. Now, 15 or 20 years later, they've sold off the vacant parcel. A house is being built there, and lo and behold, the survey says that 3 feet of this very expensive, it's not like, one that you buy down at the Menards store that's made out of plastic or something. This is a very, very nice storage shed. And all of a sudden, we have the potential of thousands of dollars because it's sitting on the next door neighbor's property, and it's been there for many years. It's not a question of adverse possession because the seller has never told the buyer, so the seller has never, or the buyer has never told the seller to remove the property. There's never been adversity, which is essential to adverse possession. So what do you do in this situation? Well, obviously you have to have that new buyer grant permission to the seller to keep that storage shed on the property, or you have to move the storage shed. It's one or the other. Either one of them is going to cost thousands of dollars, because you're going to have a survey to identify that 3 feet parcel that the neighbor would grant an easement for. The neighbor is probably not going to grant an easement for free. They're probably going to charge something for it. And then you have to hire the surveyor and possibly an attorney to draft the easement, which can then be recorded and so on and so forth. So, here's a situation that because the seller didn't think far enough forward, and when they split the property 10 or 15 or 20 years ago and make sure that their storage shed was in fact on their own property, now they're faced with the potential for thousands of dollars of correction. The client will be emotional. This is, and again, I'm sharing some of Eric's topics. Eric and I have run into a number of very interesting and challenging situations this week. And what we try to do in this live stream is bring to you those situations in a general way so that you can learn from them, that we can all learn from them. His comment here is the client will be emotional. It's our job to express their concerns without causing an increase in stress or tension for the client. That can be a very, very difficult thing to do. I know of one situation right now where we have a very emotional client, and our agent is doing everything possible to tamper down the emotions and stay on point about the marketability of the property, about the pricing of the property, about the condition of the property, the remodeling that was done in the property, and so on. It's very challenging for all of us, myself included, to push that emotion aside and say, I can't go there. I have to stay on point. I have to stay with the facts. But that's our job. That's what we have to do. Purchase agreements and ambiguous or vague language in the contracts. Wow, that's the number one cause for grievances and lawsuits which land on our desk. Number one cause. Now, I used to say to you that it's blanks in contracts. Well, I suppose probably on a national level it may still be that, but sometimes there's actually words in the blanks, but they're still blanks because they're so vague. They don't have consequences, they don't have deadlines, and as a result of that, they are about as worthless as a blank in a contract. For example, what happens when you get an appraisal that is low? Let's say that you have a house for sale for $250,000, and the appraisal comes back from the mortgage lender, and the appraisal says $220,000. Well, that's a $30,000 difference. At that moment, the buyer probably, again, given the type of financing and down payment, buyer may have the opportunity to terminate that contract based on their ability to get the mortgage approved. They may have the ability to terminate the contract. The question is, do they want to terminate the contract? And if they don't want to terminate the contract, let's say for a moment that they want to continue, they really like the house, on what basis, what boundaries, what parameters are they going to proceed? In other words, are they going to have another lender, hire a different lender, hire another appraiser, and have that appraiser go out? And what happens if that appraiser says it's worth $250,000? Well, now the buyer has a quandary. They've had one opinion at 220, they've had one at 250, but nothing in the middle was written to say what the buyer, how the buyer would proceed. The buyer had the opportunity to terminate the contract, but the buyer stayed engaged. It's what we call, everyone say it together, kick the can down the road. They basically kicked the can together down the road, the buyers and the sellers, without a contract. The contract was no longer in force, or enforceable, I should say, more accurately. And yet, nobody put anything in writing to say, here's what the buyers will do to proceed. Here is their boundary. They will go, let's say, we're going to try to go to a different mortgage lender, closing date to be extended, and the buyer will pay up to $240,000, for example. And if the mortgage, if the appraisal comes in for more than $240,000, the buyer reserves the right to terminate the contract. There are a lot of things that could have been said to clarify and to tighten that contract down. And so I caution all of you that we cannot continue to live by this kicking the can down the road mentality. We've got to have language in contracts, in addendums, which specify what's going to happen when, and what are the consequences if they don't happen. This, again, another situation that happened this week is a buyer shows up thinking that they're going to get possession, and the seller is still living there with all of their stuff in the house, and the buyer goes, I've got moving trucks out in the driveway. And the seller says, oh, well, yeah, our movers, they changed the time on us, so it'll be next Friday. Well, wow. What do? Well, hopefully, in your purchase agreement, you made it clear, and you made the sum large, for tenancy and sufferance. What is the seller going to pay if they violate the terms of the contract regarding possession? If they stay longer than what the deadline for possession calls for, they are now in a state called tenancy in sufferance, and you can charge them $200, $300, $400, $500, $1,000 a day, whatever you have in the contract. Too often our agents put in $50 a day or $100 a day, And frankly, I can't rent a hotel that I would stay in for less than that. I would just as soon stay in the house and give them $100 a day. That's not really an incentive to move out. But if it's $400 or $500 a day, I can assure you I'd be calling the moving trucks in a hurry. So again, consequences, and in writing. The best time to have conversations with your client about the well inspection, the well and septic inspection, the structural inspections, title work, surveys, all of those things. The best time to have that conversation is not when you have an issue come up after you've written an offer, or even when you're writing an offer. These are things that you should, as agents, discuss with your clients before you even go out and shop for houses. Part of our job is educating our buyers and sellers about things like surveys. Why do we need a survey? How do you read a survey? How do you interpret a survey? Now, none of us is going to be civil engineers, unless you are already. We might have a couple, but it's not our job to be civil engineers. But it is our job to have a rudimentary understanding of what a black dot means on a survey and what that means to your buyer when you are showing the property. Because you can say, this black dot shows me that your boundary is right over there. Not over there, but right there. 2 feet away, right down by your toe. We need to have and be able to express that level of that basic level of knowledge. Same thing with well and septic inspections. What happens? The purchase agreement calls for a period of time where the buyer has the right to terminate based on the results of the well and septic inspection. But it doesn't say, even though it says that the seller is supposed to order it within 10 days, it doesn't have any consequences. It doesn't say if they don't order it in 10 days, the buyer has the right to terminate the contract. Again, no consequences. It makes it very weak. It makes the contract very weak. But by the same token, what is the buyer's responsibility? What is your responsibility as a buyer's agents to advise that buyer on responding to a well and septic report which is not favorable? You have a period of time to do that within the contract. And if you don't respond, what are the consequences? Well, the consequences could be that your buyer is buying the house with a bad well and septic inspection. Or the mortgage company may come along and say, we're not going to finance it with a bad well and or septic. So we end up in these sort of vague, uncertain, tumultuous transactions few days before closing, or even the day of closing, as in one case this morning, where nobody knows what's going to happen because these issues were not dealt with when the information came forward. So I caution you, encourage you to act quickly whenever you get information, and respond within the inspection period that you're given. Do it in a clear, unambiguous way, in writing, and with a time frame for acceptance and the consequences if you can't come to an agreement. So that's a lot of stuff. And some of it we've covered before, but they're still happening. These issues are still happening out there. So again, Eric and I are here for you. 616-490-0902. Please feel free to reach out if you find yourself heading down the road of possibly being in a situation that could be difficult, and we will help you avoid it rather than trying to fix it later. That the better solution is to avoid it altogether. So thank you for joining me. I appreciate it, and we'll see you next Monday. Have a great day.